Have you ever made a split-second decision just to escape a moment only to realize that single act could change your entire life? Imagine running into your ex at a crowded cafe, panic rising, and without thinking. You turn, grab the nearest stranger and kiss him. Sounds crazy, right? But what if that stranger wasn't just anyone? What if he was a billionaire who would soon fall madly in love with you? The cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and sweet vanilla when she walked in that morning. It was supposed to be just another day, an ordinary stop before work, a quiet moment to collect her thoughts. She had just started putting her life back together after the painful breakup that had left her heart in pieces. The last thing she wanted was drama, but fate rarely asks for permission before shaking things up. She ordered her drink, pulled out her phone, and looked up only to see him, her ex, the man who had shattered her trust and taught her what heartbreak truly felt like. Her pulse quickened, her breath caught. In that split second, she knew she had to disappear, to hide, to become invisible. Panic flooded her senses like a tidal wave. She couldn't let him see her, not now, not when she finally felt strong enough to stand again. Her mind raced through escape routes, the back door, the restroom, pretending to be on a call. But before she could move, his eyes met hers from across the crowded cafe. A cold chill ran down her spine. He was already walking toward her, that same confident smirk she once adored now feeling like a threat. She glanced around desperately, searching for a way out. Then she saw him, a stranger sitting near the window, reading a newspaper, his expression calm, detached from the chaos around him. In that moment of pure instinct, she made a decision that would change everything. Without thinking, she walked straight to the stranger, her heart hammering in her chest. Every step felt surreal, like moving through a dream she couldn't control. Her ex was only a few feet away now, calling her name. She turned, faced the stranger, and kissed him. The cafe seemed to stop, the noise faded. For a heartbeat, the world froze in stunned silence. Her lips trembled against his, but she didn't pull away. It was the only thing she could think to do, a bold, reckless move to protect herself from the man who once broke her. The stranger didn't react with shock or anger. He didn't push her away. Instead, he leaned into the moment, steady, composed, and unexpectedly gentle. His hand found hers on the table, anchoring her in the storm. It was as if he understood instantly, not the details, not the story, but the emotion behind it. He didn't ask questions or make a scene. He just played along, protecting her without words. When she finally pulled back, breathless and blushing, she whispered an apology. "I'm so sorry. But before she could finish, he smiled, a calm, knowing smile that sent warmth through her veins. "You don't need to explain," he said softly. "I think I understand." Her ex, confused and embarrassed, stopped mid-stride. He stared at the two of them, disbelief and jealousy flashing across his face. For a moment, the tables had turned. The man who once made her feel small now looked powerless, unsure, and rejected. He muttered something under his breath and stormed out of the cafe, the bell above the door ringing like a victory chime. She exhaled, realizing she had just escaped the emotional trap she'd been dreading for months. It was absurd, spontaneous, and yet strangely liberating. She'd taken control in the most unexpected way possible. When the stranger spoke again, his voice was low and reassuring. "Looks like that worked," he said, with a hint of humor that broke the tension. She laughed nervously, cheeks burning. "You must think I'm crazy." He shook his head. "No," he said, "just brave." There was something in his tone, a quiet strength, a presence that drew her in. He offered to buy her another coffee, and for the first time in a long while, she said yes. As they sat there, talking like old friends, she had no idea who he truly was, that behind his tailored suit and calm demeanor was a billionaire whose life was about to intertwine with hers in ways neither of them could predict. That kiss, meant to hide her pain, had unknowingly opened the door to something far greater. It wasn't just an escape. It was the start of a story neither could walk away from. She had acted out of fear, but what she found in that moment was courage, the kind that rewrites your destiny when you least expect it. The moment their lips parted, time seemed to breathe again. The clatter of cups, the hum of conversations, and the low jazz music in the cafe slowly returned to her awareness. She blinked, realizing what she had just done. She had kissed a total stranger, not just any stranger, but one who now looked at her with eyes that felt both calm and impossibly deep. His expression wasn't one of confusion or irritation, but quiet amusement, the kind that made you wonder what secrets he was hiding behind that easy smile. She had expected anger, maybe even awkwardness, but instead, there was a hint of intrigue in the way he watched her, as if she had just broken through the walls of his perfectly ordered world. For him, that moment was equally unexpected. He wasn't used to surprises. His life revolved around control, precision, and calculated decisions. Meetings at dawn, numbers on screens, deals that shaped industries. Nothing in his life was ever random. But that kiss, that impulsive, trembling act from a stranger, disrupted everything. It wasn't something money could predict or power could prevent. It was raw, human, and completely unscripted. And for the first time in years, he found himself speechless. There was something in her eyes, vulnerability mixed with fierce courage, that stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity. She apologized again, fumbling over her words, cheeks flushed crimson. "I didn't know what else to do. My ex, he was here and I just panicked." Her voice trembled slightly, but her honesty made him smile even more. "No harm done," he said smoothly, his tone warm and reassuring. "Though I have to admit, that's the most interesting way anyone's introduced themselves to me." She laughed softly, tension melting away. For the first time since walking into the cafe, she felt safe, not because she knew him, but because his energy carried a calm that steadied her racing heart. What she didn't know was that this stranger, dressed casually in a simple white shirt and a dark blazer, was Alexander Hale, one of the most powerful young billionaires in New York. His name was whispered in business circles, printed in magazines, and chased by paparazzi. But at that table, he wasn't the billionaire. He was just a man who'd stumbled into something genuine, something that didn't come with contracts, expectations, or headlines. In her, he saw something real, unfiltered. She had looked at him not as a man of status, but as a stranger, and that alone fascinated him more than any boardroom victory ever could. Their conversation started awkwardly, but soon unfolded with surprising ease. She told him her name, explained her impulsive decision, and even laughed at herself for the chaos she had caused. He listened intently, not interrupting once. Most people tried to impress him, flatter him, or gain something from him, but she didn't even know who he was. That was refreshing. For a man surrounded by people who treated him like a walking opportunity, this woman, with her nervous laughter and unplanned honesty, was something entirely different, and he couldn't help but want to know more. As they talked, he found himself watching the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, the way she twisted her fingers around a coffee cup when she grew nervous, the way she seemed both fragile and fierce at the same time. There was a kind of authenticity about her that money couldn't buy. He hadn't realized how much he missed moments like this, real connection, without agenda. He was used to women who knew his name before he said it, who pretended to be impressed by his wealth, but were really chasing the security it offered. This was different. This was unpredictable, spontaneous, alive. When their conversation ended, and she thanked him for saving her from an awkward encounter, he found himself reluctant to let her go. "You can thank me by having dinner with me sometime," he said, his tone half serious, half playful. She hesitated, then smiled shyly. "I don't usually kiss strangers or go to dinner with them," she replied. "Maybe you should start," he said with a smirk that made her blush again. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, that spark of playful defiance between them, would be the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could imagine. As she left the cafe, he watched her walk away through the glass window, her figure fading into the busy street. For reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't look away. He had everything a man could want: power, wealth, respect, but now, For the first time in years, he felt something missing. And he realized with a faint smile that maybe life had just handed him the one thing money couldn't control, a story worth chasing. Days passed after that unexpected encounter, yet she couldn't get the stranger from the cafe out of her mind. There was something about him, the way he had handled her impulsive chaos with such calm, the gentleness in his tone, the way he made her feel safe without even knowing her name. She had told herself it was just an odd, fleeting moment, nothing more. But as much as she tried to bury it, his image kept resurfacing, the quiet confidence, the warmth of his smile, the comfort in his presence. Little did she know that ordinary, seeming man was anything but ordinary. Beneath his casual charm lay an identity that could turn her simple world upside down. Alexander Hale was not the type to chase people. His time was measured in millions, each decision, each hour, each move meticulously planned. Yet, for the first time in years, he found himself distracted. The memory of her impulsive kiss replayed in his mind like a song he couldn't turn off. Her honesty had disarmed him. There was no calculation, no agenda, just a raw, human connection he couldn't explain. He'd spent years building empires, leading companies, and conquering industries. People admired him, envied him, even feared him. But no one had ever surprised him the way she had. And that alone made her unforgettable. He tried to push the thought away, but fate had other plans. A week later, they met again, not by chance this time. She had been helping organize a charity art event for a local community shelter, and he, as one of the anonymous sponsors, attended quietly. She almost didn't recognize him at first, dressed in a sharp black suit, surrounded by assistants, photographers, and people who spoke his name with reverence. When she finally realized who he was, her heart nearly stopped. The man she had kissed, the stranger who bought her coffee and smiled like an ordinary guy, was Alexander Hale, the billionaire whose face graced magazines and business covers across the country. Her mind spun with disbelief. She remembered the warmth of his hand, the softness of his voice, the way he had looked at her with kindness. None of it made sense now. Why hadn't he told her who he was? Why pretend to be just another stranger? A wave of confusion and embarrassment rushed over her. She suddenly felt small, a woman from an ordinary background who had kissed a man from a world she couldn't even begin to understand. The gulf between their lives felt immeasurable. How could she possibly fit into his world of luxury cars, private jets, and multi-million-dollar boardrooms? But Alexander, noticing her shock, approached with the same calm composure he had shown that day in the cafe. "So," he said softly, a teasing glint in his eye, "still think I'm just a stranger?" She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run. "You could have told me who you were," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Would it have made a difference?" he asked. The question lingered between them, heavy with truth, because deep down she knew it would have. Had she known he was rich and powerful, she might never have spoken so freely, never acted so boldly. Their connection had been pure because it was unfiltered, untouched by fame or fortune. He explained that he hadn't meant to deceive her. He'd simply wanted to be treated like a person, not a billionaire, and she had done exactly that. "You were real with me," he said, his tone sincere. "No one is real anymore." His words softened her anger, but they also stirred something deeper, a mix of admiration and fear. She admired his humility, but she feared the gap between them. Could someone like her really belong in his world? He, on the other hand, saw something in her that money couldn't buy: authenticity. Something his wealth had often stolen from people around him. As the evening went on, she tried to act normal, but every glance, every smile from him carried new meaning. The crowd whispered, the cameras flashed, and she could feel eyes turning toward them. It was like being thrust into a spotlight she never asked for. But amidst the glitter and noise, Alexander's focus never wavered from her. When the event ended, he offered her a quiet walk outside, away from the chaos. "You don't have to be afraid of who I am," he said softly. "I'm still the same man you kissed that day, the same one who would have bought you a coffee, even if I didn't own half the city." She smiled faintly, unsure whether to believe him, yet something in his tone felt genuine. In that moment, she realized that beneath the billionaire persona was a man longing for something real the same way she longed for someone who would see her beyond her fears and flaws. The night breeze carried the scent of spring as they walked together under the city lights, two worlds colliding in silence. And though she didn't know it yet, the secret of his identity wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning of a love that would test everything she thought she knew about trust, vulnerability, and fate. The night of the charity event changed everything. After that revelation, she found herself standing on the invisible line between two realities: the quiet, grounded world she came from, and the shimmering, dizzying empire that belonged to Alexander Hale. It felt unreal. Just days ago, she had been walking to work, saving every dollar, living in a small apartment where the city's noise never really stopped. Now she was stepping into black cars, attending dinners in glittering high-rise penthouses, and sitting across from a man whose name alone could move markets. The contrast was intoxicating and terrifying. She had never felt so out of place in her life. Everywhere she went with him, people looked, some with admiration, some with envy, and others with judgment. They whispered her name, her background, speculating on who she was and why he had chosen her. To them, she was an anomaly, a woman from nowhere who had somehow captured the attention of one of the most powerful men in the country. The attention felt suffocating. Cameras followed, strangers dug through her past, and every social media post became a headline. She wasn't prepared for that world, a world that demanded perfection, poise, and power, and she began to wonder if she could survive in it. Alexander noticed her discomfort. He tried to protect her, to shield her from the noise, but even he couldn't control everything. He took her to quiet dinners instead of public restaurants, long drives out of the city instead of glamorous parties. Yet, despite his efforts, the difference between them remained like a shadow. He could buy entire companies with a single phone call. She was worried about paying rent. He had been educated at elite schools across the world. She'd worked her way through college waiting tables. They came from different planets, and though their hearts connected, the reality of their worlds constantly collided. But what made Alexander different was his awareness of that gap and his unwillingness to let it define them. He didn't flaunt his wealth around her, didn't try to impress her with extravagant gifts. Instead, he listened. He learned about her fears, her dreams, her memories, things that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with who she truly was. For him, her simplicity was refreshing. She saw life through a lens he had long forgotten, a lens not colored by privilege, but by gratitude. When she smiled, it wasn't rehearsed for cameras. When she spoke, it wasn't filtered through power. She was real in a world full of illusions, and that truth drew him closer every day. Still, the cracks began to show. She struggled with the expectations placed on her. His friends, people born into wealth, were polite but condescending. They asked subtle questions that reminded her she didn't belong. Where did you say you studied? Oh, you don't have a family foundation. Their smiles were laced with superiority. She tried to ignore it, but deep down the insecurity grew. No matter how kind Alexander was, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a story that wasn't hers. That one day, she would wake up and realize she had been just a temporary distraction in his extraordinary life. One evening, during a gala filled with sparkling chandeliers and $1,000 gowns, she finally broke. The pressure, the stares, the whispered gossip, it became too much. She slipped out to the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly below her. Her chest felt tight. When Alexander found her, she was fighting back tears. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "This isn't my world." He looked at her for a long moment before stepping closer. "Maybe not," he said gently, "but it's not really mine either." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "This world, the money, the fame, the endless noise, it doesn't feel real anymore. But when I'm with you, I do." His words silenced her. In that moment, she saw him differently, not as a billionaire, not as a man of influence, but as someone lonely in the crowd, yearning for the same authenticity she had been running from. She realized that both of them were outsiders in their own ways, she to his world of power and he to the world of emotion. That night, as the city lights flickered around them, the divide between their worlds blurred for the first time. For the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, love could exist between opposites, not in spite of their differences, but because of them. Still, the clash wasn't over. Every step they took together would continue to challenge them. But in that moment, standing beneath a sky that seemed too vast to belong to anyone, they both understood something simple yet profound. Real love doesn't come from shared wealth, background, or fame. It comes from shared courage, the courage to meet in the middle of two worlds and stay there, no matter how impossible it seems. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, lessons, and quiet moments that neither of them could have predicted. After the chaos of the gala and her breakdown on the balcony, something shifted between them. The walls she had built, the fear of not belonging, the shame of being less, began to slowly crumble. Alexander didn't just offer reassurance. He showed her, through his actions, that she wasn't a guest in his world, she was part of it. But more importantly, he began to realize something too. For all his power, wealth, and influence, none of it meant anything without someone to share it with. Their love grew not in the spotlight, but in the quiet corners where no one was watching. He would take her to hidden gardens outside the city, where she could breathe away from the pressure of cameras and whispers. They'd walk barefoot through the grass, talking about dreams instead of deals, laughing about the absurdity of how they met. For the first time in years, Alexander wasn't performing, he was living. And she, who had once been haunted by heartbreak and self-doubt, began to rediscover herself through his eyes. He didn't just make her feel wanted, he made her feel seen. But love, as always, brings mirrors and realizations that can't be avoided. One night, sitting on the rooftop of his penthouse, she confessed the truth that had been eating at her. "Sometimes I wonder if you'd still care about me if I hadn't kissed you that day," she said quietly, staring at the skyline. He looked at her, surprised. "You think that moment was an accident?" he asked softly. "Maybe it was fate giving us a chance to meet when we never would have otherwise?" She smiled sadly. "Fate, maybe, but it still feels unreal sometimes. You belong to a world that moves too fast, too bright. I'm afraid I'll get lost in it." Her vulnerability hit him deeply. For years, Alexander had lived in a world where vulnerability was a weakness, where emotions were liabilities, and love was something that came with conditions. But this woman, sitting barefoot on his rooftop, challenged all of that. She wasn't impressed by his cars or his suits. She didn't need him for money or status. She simply wanted honesty, something no one else had ever demanded from him. And that realization humbled him. He realized that for the first time in his life, someone loved him, not the image of him. The truth was, Alexander had been lonely long before she arrived. His world was full of noise, assistants, meetings, investors, but it lacked meaning. Everyone wanted something from him, but she wanted him just as he was. That changed everything. He began showing her parts of himself he had buried. The boy who grew up with nothing, the man who built walls to survive, the loneliness behind the success. And in return, she showed him her scars, the heartbreaks, the fears, the moments she had felt small and unseen. Together, they began to heal. But love doesn't grow without friction, and the more they understood each other, the more they realized what it demanded. She taught him that money couldn't fix everything, that trust had to be earned, not bought. There were moments he slipped, trying to solve problems with his wallet, thinking generosity could ease her worries. She would stop him with a gentle look and say, "I don't need the world, Alexander. I just need you in it." That line became the anchor of their relationship, a reminder that the greatest gift love offers isn't luxury, but presence. As weeks turned into months, they found balance in their differences. He learned to slow down, to appreciate simplicity, coffee on her balcony instead of champagne in penthouses, quiet dinners instead of red carpets. And she learned to see beyond her fears, to accept that sometimes love does find you in unexpected places, even when it feels impossible. It wasn't the fairy tale people imagined. There were fights, misunderstandings, and moments when they almost gave up. But every time they came close to breaking, they remembered the truth that had started it all. A single impulsive kiss born out of fear had turned into the kind of love both had been searching for without even knowing it. Through each argument, each reconciliation, each late-night conversation, they realized that love wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. She found her voice in his world, and he found his heart in hers. And when she looked at him one morning, sunlight spilling through the windows, she finally understood what her heart had been trying to tell her all along. Sometimes the things that begin in chaos lead us to the peace we've been searching for. That was their realization, that love isn't always gentle or predictable. It crashes into your life when you least expect it, tears down the walls you've built, and forces you to see yourself through someone else's eyes. What began as an impulsive kiss had become a quiet revolution, one that changed not just how they saw each other, but how they saw themselves. Time has a way of testing love, bending it, reshaping it, and revealing what lies beneath the surface. For them, it wasn't the grand gestures or the luxury that defined their story, but the small moments that quietly stitched their lives together. As the seasons changed, so did they. The woman who had once kissed a stranger in panic was no longer afraid of being seen, and the man who had spent years hiding behind wealth and status was learning, slowly but surely, how to be vulnerable. Their love, born from chaos, was evolving into something deeper, something that transformed them both. For her, the transformation began the day she stopped apologizing for who she was. She had spent so long feeling like she didn't belong in his world, measuring herself against expectations she never asked for. But one evening, as they prepared for a high-profile charity gala, she caught a reflection in the mirror. The elegant gown, the diamonds, the perfection, none of it mattered. Beneath it all, she was still the same woman who had followed her instincts, who had dared to act on impulse. And that was her strength. When Alexander came to escort her, she looked at him and said with quiet confidence, "I don't need to fit into your world anymore. I just need to make my own place in it." That moment changed everything. For Alexander, the transformation was slower, but just as profound. For years, he had believed control was the key to success. Every move in his life was planned, every deal, every decision. But love doesn't follow logic. She taught him that. He learned to embrace uncertainty, to let go of the need to always have the answers. There were nights when he would watch her reading on the couch, her laughter filling the room, and realize that for all the billions he had earned, her presence, her light was the only thing that ever made him feel truly rich. He began to prioritize moments over meetings, connection over conquest. For the first time in his adult life, he was living, not just existing. Their journey wasn't perfect. There were arguments, insecurities, and moments when their differences seemed too wide to bridge. But every fight ended with understanding, not because they were flawless, but because they chose to stay. Love had taught them both humility. She learned to trust again, to believe that not all love stories end in heartbreak. He learned that power isn't about control, but about choosing gentleness when you could easily dominate. Together, they built something rare, a partnership grounded in respect, honesty, and growth. The world around them continued to watch, speculate, and gossip. Yet, neither of them cared anymore. They had found something that existed beyond the noise, a quiet truth between them that couldn't be defined by headlines. Alexander no longer hid behind his wealth, and she no longer shrank from her past. They began working together on community projects, blending their strengths, his influence, and her compassion. She helped him see that his resources could change lives beyond profit margins. He helped her believe that even the smallest dreams were worth pursuing. In giving to others, they found themselves growing even closer. And perhaps the most beautiful transformation was the way they saw love itself. What started as an impulsive kiss, a desperate attempt to escape the past, had become the foundation for their future. They learned that love isn't something you plan or predict. It's something you surrender to. It's messy and unpredictable, but it changes you in ways nothing else can. He no longer saw her as the woman who stumbled into his life. She was his equal, his partner, his compass. And she no longer saw him as the billionaire who had once intimidated her. He was simply the man who saw her for who she truly was. Years later, when they revisited the same café where it all began, they sat at the same table, the memory of that first kiss still vivid in both their minds. The world outside buzzed with noise, but inside, time seemed to slow. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked, smiling softly. Alexander chuckled. "Every day," he said. "It's the best accident that ever happened to me." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining, a symbol of how far they'd come. In that simple gesture lay everything they had learned. Love can't be forced, planned, or bought. It finds you in the strangest places, at the strangest times, and transforms you into someone you never thought you could be. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was real. Two people from opposite worlds who collided by chance and stayed by choice. And though the world would remember them as the billionaire and the woman who stole his heart, they knew the truth was much simpler. They were just two souls who had found each other in a moment of chaos, and, through love, had transformed that chaos into something lasting, something extraordinary. And so, her story comes full circle, from one impulsive kiss to a love that defied reason, judgment, and fate itself. What began as an act of fear became a moment of destiny. In running from her past, she ran straight into the future she never knew she deserved. It reminds us that sometimes life doesn't follow the plans we make, it follows the courage we show when we stop overthinking and simply act. Her story isn't just about romance, it's about transformation. About how two strangers from different worlds taught each other what it means to be truly seen, truly loved, and truly alive. He showed her that love could be safe again, and she showed him that love could be real again. Together, they proved that the best stories don't start perfectly. They start with chaos, courage, and one unexpected choice that changes everything. So maybe, just maybe, that's what fate really is, not a grand design written in the stars, but a series of wild, unplanned moments that lead us exactly where we're meant to be. One kiss, one stranger, one leap of faith, and a love that would never have existed if she hadn't been brave enough to take it.